The wind tore through Youngstown, Ohio, with the bitter edge of a 35-degree November night, rattling the rusted hinges of a neon Miller Lite sign that flickered at 110 volts above the entrance to the Iron Anchor. The bar squatted on a forgotten corner of Mahoning Avenue, its brick facade chipped and weathered like the steel mills that once defined this Rust Belt town. Inside, the air was heavy with the tang of fried pickles, stale beer, and the faint musk of cigarette smoke that lingered in defiance of state bans. A 12-foot mahogany counter, scarred by decades of bottle caps and pocket knives, stretched along one wall, its surface gleaming dully under the glow of fluorescent tubes. In the corner, a jukebox churned out Merle Haggard's Okie from Muskogee, the twang of steel guitar weaving through the din of laughter, clinking glasses, and the occasional thud of boots on a hardwood floor, sticky with spilled drinks. Above the bar, a 40-inch flat-screen TV blared the Ohio State-Michigan game, the crowd's cheers swelling with every first down, a ritual as sacred as Sunday church in this part of the country. The Iron Anchor wasn't just a bar. It was a microcosm of small-town America, where reputations were forged in late-night boasts and broken in barroom brawls. The regulars, a mix of factory workers, bikers, and lifelong locals, filled the room with a restless energy. They leaned over tables cluttered with 16-ounce cans of Budweiser and Coors, their voices rough from years of shouting over machinery or wind-whipped rides on Harleys. Tattoos snaked across forearms, and leather vests creaked with every gesture, each patch a badge of belonging in a town that had little else to offer. At the center of it all sat Jake Bulldog Carter, the bar's unofficial king. At 6 feet 2 inches and 240 pounds, Jake was a mountain of a man, his beard like barbed wire, and his skull tattoo glinting under the dim lights. His crew, 4 men with weathered faces and knuckles scarred from fights, flanked him, their smirks as sharp as the switchblades they carried. Jake's presence dominated the room, his laugh cutting through the noise like a chainsaw, his authority unchallenged in this gritty sanctuary. The door creaked open, and a gust of cold air swept in, carrying with it a man who didn't belong. Keanu Reeves stepped into the Iron Anchor, his boots scuffing softly on the worn floorboards. He was unremarkable at first glance. A faded black t-shirt clung to his lean frame, jeans worn thin at the knees, and a weathered leather jacket slung over one shoulder. A baseball cap, pulled low, shadowed his eyes, giving him the look of a drifter who'd wandered off Interstate 80. At 6 feet tall, he moved with a quiet grace, his steps measured, his posture relaxed but alert, like a man who'd walked through storms and come out steady. The regulars glanced up, their eyes lingering only a moment before dismissing him. No club patches, no chrome rings, no swagger. He wasn't worth their time. But there was something in his silence, a weight that hung heavier than the bar's raucous energy, though no one noticed it yet. Keanu approached the bar, his voice low but clear as he ordered a 4-ounce glass of bourbon, neat. The bartender, a wiry woman named Sarah with a ponytail and a guarded smile, poured the drink with a practiced hand, her eyes flicking over him curiously. She'd seen plenty of strangers pass through, but none carried themselves quite like this one. Calm, almost too calm, like the still air before a thunderstorm. Keanu nodded his thanks, took the glass, and scanned the room. His gaze settled on a small table in the corner, tucked beneath a faded photograph of Youngstown's old Republic steel mill, its smokestack frozen in time against a 1970s sky. The table was empty, its single chair wobbling on uneven legs. He claimed it, setting his bourbon down and draping his jacket over the chair's back, unaware that in the Iron Anchor, that table belonged to Jake Carter. Across the room, Jake's eyes narrowed, his thick fingers tightening around his beer bottle. He tapped it twice against the table, a deliberate signal that drew his crew's attention. The sound cut through the jukebox's twang and the football game's roar, a subtle challenge that hung in the air like gunpowder. "Look at that," Jake said, his voice loud enough to carry but low enough to sound casual. "Some guy thinks he can waltz in and take my spot." His crew chuckled, a low, predatory sound. One of them, a lanky biker named Tommy with a snake tattoo curling up his neck, leaned forward, smirking. "Looks like he got lost on his way to a coffee shop," he said, sparking a round of laughter. Another, a burly man called Rusty, added, "Bet he's never even seen a bike, let alone ridden one." The bar's energy shifted, the air growing taut as the regulars sensed a spectacle brewing. Keanu didn't react. He took a slow sip of his bourbon, the amber liquid catching the neon glow as he set the glass back down with a soft clink. His eyes drifted to the window, where the wind battered the glass, rattling it in its frame. Outside, the world was a blur of streetlights and frost, but inside, the storm was just beginning. Sarah, wiping down the counter with a rag, watched from behind the bar, her stomach knotting. She'd seen Jake's temper flare before, over a spilled drink, a wrong look, or nothing at all. But this stranger, with his quiet demeanor and steady hands, didn't fit the usual pattern of victims. He wasn't cowering, wasn't bristling, wasn't even looking at Jake. He just sat. His silence louder than the bar's noise, a challenge no one yet understood. Jake leaned back in his chair, his leather vest creaking, his grin sharp and dangerous. "Hey, Drifter," he called, his voice slicing through the chatter. "You deaf or just stupid? That's my table you're sitting at." The room hushed, the football game forgotten, even Merle Haggard's voice fading as the jukebox clicked to the next track. All eyes turned to the corner, where Keanu sat, unmoved, his bourbon untouched since that first sip. He glanced up, his eyes meeting Jake's with a calm that felt like a dare. "Didn't see your name on it," he said, his voice smooth, measured, carrying no trace of fear or defiance, just fact. The words landed like a spark in dry grass. Tommy snorted. Rusty chuckled, but Jake's grin tightened, his knuckles whitening around his bottle. In the Iron Anchor, taking Jake's table was more than a mistake. It was a declaration of war. And Keanu Reeves, unknown to the room, had just lit the fuse. Jake, bulldog. Carter's eyes burned with a mix of contempt and unease as he sized up Keanu Reeves, the stranger sitting at his table in the Iron Anchor. At 6 feet 2 inches and 240 pounds, Jake's presence was a force, his skull tattoo gleaming under the bar's dim lights. "Hollywood Drifter," he sneered, loud enough for his crew to hear, their smirks egging him on. His fingers, thick as lug nuts, gripped a 16-ounce bottle of Coors, and with a deliberate flick of his wrist, he tipped it over Keanu's table. Beer splashed across the scarred wood, soaking the edge of Keanu's faded black t-shirt and pooling around his 4-ounce bourbon glass. The bar's chatter dimmed, eyes turning to the corner, waiting for the stranger to crack. Keanu didn't flinch. He reached for a napkin from the rusted dispenser, his movements slow and deliberate, wiping the table dry with the calm of a man who'd faced worse storms. "No harm done," he said, his voice low, steady, cutting through the jukebox's twang like a blade through fog. His restraint hit Jake like a jab, unsettling the biker's need to dominate. Jake's grin faltered, his insecurity flaring. He wasn't just defending his table. He was defending his place as the bar's alpha, a status hard-won in this Rust Belt town where respect was currency. Sarah, the 25-year-old bartender who'd poured drinks at the Iron Anchor since dropping out of community college, watched from behind the 12-foot mahogany counter, her hands frozen on a rag. She'd seen Jake bully patrons before, but this stranger's calm was different, unshakable, like the steel beams in the old mill photo above his table. Keanu's gaze flicked to that faded image, a 200-foot smokestack against a gray sky, a silent nod to a friend lost in a factory fire 15 years ago. The glance was brief, but Sarah caught it, sensing a weight behind his quiet that made her heart ache. She wanted to intervene, to tell Jake to back off, but fear of his temper kept her rooted, a working-class reflex she hated in herself. Jake, stung by Keanu's indifference, stepped closer, his boots thumping on the sticky floor. "You think you're slick, huh?" he growled, and with a quick swipe, he knocked Keanu's bourbon glass to the ground. It shattered, the sharp crack silencing the bar, Merle Haggard's voice now a distant hum. Keanu looked at the shards, then up at Jake, his eyes steady, unflinching. "You're trying to prove something," he said, his tone even, "but it's not to me." The words hung heavy, exposing Jake's desperation, setting the stage for a reckoning in the smoky haze of the iron anchor. Jake, bulldog, Carter's face twisted with rage, his 6'2", 240-pound frame looming over Keanu Reeves in the iron anchor's smoky haze. The bar's jukebox paused, Merle Haggard's twang fading, leaving only the hum of the 40-inch TV's football game. Jake, desperate to reclaim his dominance, grabbed Keanu's leather jacket from the chair and flung it to the sticky, hardwood floor, grinding his boot into it with a sneer. "Let's see if you're still calm when I'm done with you, drifter," he taunted, his voice thick with bravado. The bar fell silent, the 12-foot mahogany counter, reflecting the tension, as patrons braced for a fight, their 16-ounce beers forgotten. Keanu stood, 6 feet tall, his frame steady as he dusted off his jacket with deliberate care. His eyes, calm under the brim of his baseball cap, met Jake's. "This isn't about me, Jake," he said, his voice low, cutting through the biker's bluster like a knife. "It's about you proving something to them." The words pierced Jake's ego, exposing his need for validation in a room where respect was everything. The crowd shifted, uneasy, as Sarah, the 25-year-old bartender, gripped the counter, her heart racing. She saw the truth in Keanu's gaze, a strength forged in pain, tied to the faded mill photo above his table. The door swung open, a 35-degree gust chilling the room. Chuck Norris stepped in, a 60-year-old former martial arts instructor, his weathered denim shirt tucked into faded jeans. His boots, polished but scuffed from years of wear, clicked on the 20-foot hardwood floor, each step commanding silence. The bar's energy shifted, the football game's cheers fading to a murmur. Chuck's presence was a quiet storm, his broad shoulders and lined face carrying the weight of a legend who needed no introduction. He nodded to Keanu, a faint smile breaking through. "Didn't expect to find you in a place like this," he said, his gravelly voice warm but firm. Chuck turned to Jake, his gaze steady, unyielding. "You're picking on a man who's faced worse than you and walked away stronger," he said, his words slicing through the tension. The crowd leaned in, sensing authority. "He's here for his friend, the one who didn't make it out of that factory fire 15 years ago. Show some respect." The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Keanu's glance returned to the mill photo, his silence now heavy with loss. Jake's bravado crumbled, his crew averting their eyes. Sarah's breath caught, guilt mixing with admiration for Keanu's restraint. The iron anchor, once Jake's kingdom, now belonged to the quiet man who'd endured its worst and stood taller for it. In the dim glow of the iron anchor, Jake Bulldog Carter's bravado crumbled under Chuck Norris's words and Keanu Reeves's unyielding calm. The 6'2", 240-pound biker stood frozen, his skull tattoo dulled by the weight of his exposed insecurity. Shaken, he muttered, "Didn't know," his apology barely audible over the faint hum of the 40-inch TV showing the Ohio State-Michigan game. His crew, Tommy, Rusty, and the others, averted their eyes, their respect for Jake fading like the neon Miller Lite sign flickering at a 110 volts. The bar, once Jake's domain, held its breath, the 20-foot hardwood floor silent beneath the tension. Sarah, the 25-year-old bartender, stepped from behind the 12-foot mahogany counter, her hands trembling but resolute. She placed a fresh 4-ounce glass of bourbon, neat, in front of Keanu, her voice soft but firm. "This one's on the house," she said, glancing at the faded mill photo above his table. "I should have spoken up earlier. This is for your friend." Her gesture, small but sincere, shifted the bar's atmosphere, earning quiet nods from patrons clutching 16-ounce beers. Keanu looked up, his eyes warm under his baseball cap. "Thank you, Sarah," he said, sliding a $10 bill across the table. "This place is louder than it needs to be, but it's got heart." He stood, 6 feet tall, his leather jacket slung over his shoulder, and nodded to Chuck. Chuck, the 60-year-old martial arts legend, in a weathered denim shirt, gave a subtle nod back, his scuffed boots clicking as they walked toward the door. Their steps echoed on the gravel lot outside, crunching under a starry Ohio sky, chilled to 35 degrees. Inside, the bar remained hushed, the jukebox pausing before Merle Haggard's next track. Sarah swept up the broken glass from Jake's earlier outburst, her movements deliberate, as if cleaning more than just the floor. Mike, a younger patron who'd laughed with Jake's crew, stared at his beer, his voice low. "I didn't know he was one of us," he said, the weight of his misjudgment heavy. The bartender, wiping the counter, shook his head. "He's more than that, Mike. He's what we could be." The words lingered, a quiet lesson in the smoky air. The Iron Anchor, a microcosm of Youngstown's grit, felt changed. Sarah set a fresh glass at Keanu's empty table, a silent tribute to his friend and his strength. Jake slumped in his chair, his crew silent, their beers untouched. The bar's heart, as Keanu had said, beat stronger now, tempered by a man who'd honored his past with dignity and shown a community its own potential for redemption. Outside the Iron Anchor, the 40-degree Ohio night bit at the gravel lot, where Keanu Reeves and Chuck Norris stood beside Chuck's 1980s Chevy pickup, its 6-foot bed rusted from decades of Youngstown winters. The neon Miller Lite sign flickered at 110 volts above the bar's door, casting a faint glow on their faces. Keanu's leather jacket hung over his shoulder, his baseball cap still pulled low. But his posture, 6 feet tall, steady, unbowed, carried the weight of a man who'd faced down a room and walked away whole. Chuck, the 60-year-old martial arts legend, leaned against the truck's chipped hood, his weathered denim shirt catching the starlight. "You didn't need me in there," Chuck said, his gravelly voice warm with respect. "But they needed to see what strength looks like." Keanu glanced sideways, a faint smile softening his features. "Sometimes silence speaks louder than a fight," he replied, his words carrying the calm of someone who'd learned to carry pain without letting it spill. His gaze drifted to the horizon, where the silhouette of the old Republic steel mill loomed, its 200-foot smokestack piercing the starry sky like a monument to forgotten dreams. "I came to remember him," Keanu said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not to prove anything." The friend he'd lost in the factory fire 15 years ago lingered in that glance, a quiet ache that gave his restraint in the bar its depth. Chuck nodded, his eyes following Keanu's to the smokestack. "And you reminded them what matters," he said. "Not power, not fear, but dignity." They climbed into the truck, the engine rumbling to life with a low growl that echoed across the lot. As the Chevy's taillights faded into the 40-degree night, the Iron Anchor stood silent, its 20-foot hardwood floor still bearing the scars of the evening's tension. Inside, Sarah, the 25-year-old bartender, moved with purpose behind the 12-foot mahogany counter. She placed a fresh 4-ounce glass of bourbon, neat, at Keanu's empty table, its wobbly legs steady under the weight of her gesture. It was a silent tribute, not just to Keanu's friend, but to the strength he'd shown, a strength that had reshaped the bar's heart. The jukebox, as if sensing the moment, clicked to America the Beautiful, its melody weaving through the smoky air, stirring a sense of pride and reflection. Patrons, clutching their 16-ounce beers, sat a little straighter, their faces softened by the weight of a lesson they hadn't expected to learn. The bar's silence spoke louder than Jake, Bulldog Carter's earlier bluster. Jake, his 240-pound frame slumped in a chair, stared at the floor, his skull tattoo hidden in the shadows. His crew, Tommy, Rusty, and the others, nursed their drinks, their earlier smirks replaced by unease. Mike, the younger patron who'd laughed with them, broke the quiet. "I didn't know he was one of us," he said, his voice trembling with realization. "That fire. He lost someone and we just—" He trailed off, guilt heavy in his words. The bartender, wiping the counter with slow, deliberate strokes, looked up. "He's more than that, Mike," he said. "He's what we could be, strong enough to stand tall without tearing others down." The lessons of the night settled over the iron anchor like dust after a storm. First, dignity outshines dominance. Keanu's refusal to fight, his steady calm in the face of Jake's taunts, showed that true strength isn't in fists, but in standing firm. Second, resilience through loss defines character. Keanu's quiet tribute to his friend revealed a man who'd carried grief for 15 years, yet chose kindness over anger, a testament to the American spirit of enduring hardship with grace. Third, community can heal when it chooses to see. Sarah's bourbon and Mike's reflection marked a shift. A small-town bar learning to value heart over bravado, echoing the U.S. ideal of second chances. Finally, courage isn't always loud. Keanu's silence, paired with Chuck's understated authority, taught that power lies in restraint, a lesson as American as the open road. Sarah swept the last shards of broken glass from Jake's outburst, her hands steady now, as if she'd reclaimed a piece of her own courage. The empty table, lit by the neon glow, stood as a symbol, not of a fight won, but of a truth shared. The patrons, once divided by Jake's reign, felt a quiet unity, a nod to the community that Youngstown's mills had once forged. The iron anchor, for all its grit, had found its heart, thanks to a man who'd walked in to honor a memory and left behind a mirror for others to see themselves. To everyone who's followed this story, thank you for joining us on this journey through the iron anchor. Your support keeps these tales of dignity and resilience alive. If Keanu's strength moved you, drop a strength in the comments and hit that subscribe button to stay with us for more stories that remind us what it means to be human. We see you, we appreciate you, and we're honored to share this road with you. As the Chevy's rumble faded, the wind howled across the lot, carrying the faint echo of America the Beautiful into the night. Keanu and Chuck drove toward the horizon, the mill's smokestack a silent sentinel behind them. The iron anchor stood quieter now, its patrons carrying a lesson heavier than any brawl. Real power isn't in dominating a room, but in leaving it better than you found it, with a glass, a memory, and a truth that lingers long after the door swings shut.